Heading into week 4 of the fantasy football season, here's a few tight ends I've looked at on the waiver wire. The first guy's Tyler Conklin of the Minnesota Vikings. So the first 2 out of 3 weeks here, Conklin, he's put up good fantasy numbers. Week 1 at Cincinnati, 4 catches, 41 yards. Week 2 at Arizona, only 2 catches, 15 yards. But week 3 versus Seattle, 7 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, that's a huge ball game for Conklin. He's in one of the better offenses in all of football over there in Minnesota. And a lot of teams, they can obviously be worried about Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, but Conklin, he's going to be open in the middle of the field a lot, like we saw in this game in week 3 for him versus the Seattle Seahawks. And he's got 2 good matchups coming up in week 4 and 5 versus the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions. So right here, Conklin's available in 96% of fantasy leagues. And he had a huge ball game, second in fantasy points for tight ends on the week. And he's definitely an ad this week, especially in a week where it's a weak position to get tight ends on waivers. The second tight end's Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. So Dawson Knox, he had a decent game in week 3 versus Washington. 4 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. So far he's been pretty decent for PPR leagues, is Dawson Knox. Week 1 versus Pittsburgh, 4 catches, 41 yards. Week 2 in Miami, 2 catches, 17 yards, and a touchdown. And week 3, like I mentioned, the 4 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, Josh Allen, he spreads that ball around with all the weapons he has on this Buffalo Bill offense. But he likes Dawson Knox a lot as a big red zone threat and target. And that's what we saw the first 2 out of 3 weeks here for Allen, hitting Knox in the red zone. Big target, like I mentioned. And right here, he's got a great matchup in week 4 versus Houston. So it wouldn't surprise me to see him have 30, 40 yards in that game and find the end zone as well. And he's available in 91% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end I look to get this week, Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a lot of rumblings out of training camp before the season started about Freiermuth. And in week 3 here, he had a pretty decent game with 3 catches, 22 yards, and a touchdown for 11.2 fantasy points in PPR leagues. So right here, the first couple weeks, he didn't do much. Week 1 at Buffalo, 1 catch for 24 yards. And week 2 versus the Raiders, 4 catches, 36 yards. So right here, he's getting more and more into the offense and involved here over Eric Ebron is Freiermuth. And right here in week 4, he's got a pretty decent matchup at the Green Bay Packers, where obviously they're going to have to throw the football a lot in that ball game is Pittsburgh, in my opinion, where it's going to be a high-scoring type of ball game once again. And now coming off a bad loss in week 3 versus the Cincinnati Bengals, losing by 2 touchdowns, they're going to have to throw the ball more. They're going to try to get him involved more, and he's available right now, 92% of fantasy leagues. So in deeper leagues where you need a tight end, he's definitely worth an ad. The next tight end is Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. At Gesicki, I said to drop him, but this week he came back with a vengeance. And he looked pretty good with Jacoby Brissett, especially that he had 10 catches for 86 yards on 12 targets. And next week, the Dolphins, they got a good matchup versus Indianapolis, where I think Gesicki can have a pretty decent game once again. And right now, he did get dropped in 6% of fantasy league over the last week, but now he's available in 44% of leagues. So this is probably the last week where many people would have an opportunity to go out there and add Gesicki off the wire after a big game like he had here. So I know not each and every week he's going to be consistent, but right now Brissett likes him a lot, and Brissett should be starting the next 2 or 3 weeks before Tua Tagovailoa comes back. 5th and final tight end I looked at on waivers this week's Gerald Everett of the Seattle Seahawks. So Everett, week 1, had a good ball game, finding the end zone, 2 catches, 20 yards, and a touchdown. Week 2 versus Tennessee, he was invisible, 1 catch for 3 yards on 2 targets. And week 3 in Minnesota, 5 catches, 54 yards. And week 4, he's got a good matchup at San Francisco. Russell Wilson in this offense, they weren't great in week 3 versus the Minnesota Vikings. So right here in week 4, I think they're going to get back onto things. And Gerald Everett, he's another tight end who's a big target, and definitely a guy who could work the middle of the field here for Wilson and this team. In the last couple seasons, they've been looking for a tight end who could produce. And Everett, he's not going to be an each and every week starter here, but most weeks I think he's good for a 12-team league starter at the tight end position, and he's available right now 5% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few tight ends I've looked at on waivers here heading into week 4 of the fantasy football season.